Welcome to Tea Time Spiritual Conversations for, with, and about women. I'm your host, Twanna Henderson, and I want to remind you to like this podcast and share it with your family and your friends. Well, we have another exciting guest with us on today. Our guest is Barb Winters. Barb is a pastor's wife near Orlando, Florida, and parent of 4 children. She writes and speaks to encourage, support, and offer support to parents of children struggling with pornography. She is a certified sexual risk avoidance specialist who is also a real mom who has dealt with a real problem facing families today, including having a child who is a recovering porn addict. She is the founder of hopefulmom.net. Barb, welcome to Tea Time.
I'm so blessed to be here. Thanks so much for having me on here.
Well, I'm glad to have you. Today's topic is definitely one that we don't talk about a lot, but it's so needed. And I know that the ministry that you have was birthed out of your pain that you experienced with your son. So just start off by just telling us why you started hopefulmom.net.
I'd love to tell my story. So yeah, it's birthed from our personal story. So we moved to Florida about 6 years ago to start a church. My husband is a pastor, like you said, and go Converge, yay, yay. And so we were here and we just moved to Florida and we were enjoying the sunshine and the beautiful surroundings. And my husband and I had taken a walk to just kind of see what was going on. And as we rounded the corner to cross the busy street, to come back to our house, we saw our son, who was 14 at the time, just standing on our yard in hysterics. He was jumping up and down. He was motioning to us. He was crying hysterically. We just saw him and our hearts dropped. We couldn't figure out, is his sister lying in a pool of blood? Is the house on fire? What is going on?
Yeah.
And so when we finally got to him, I could barely understand what he was saying. I could hear porn. I could hear police, I could hear arrest. And so when I finally deciphered the code, we found out that he had been watching pornography, and a bogus warning had popped up on his screen saying that if he didn't pay money, they were going to send the police to arrest him. Yeah. And so he was panicked. And we're glad that he came to us. But this was not in our radar. We had no idea this was going on in our home. So we had all the feels. We felt confused, shock, anger, guilt, like a bad mom.
14 years old.
Absolutely. We had just literally, my heart mom just dropped, and there we were standing on our lawn with the grass green and the sky blue and these flowers blooming around us. And yet I just remembered that moment, the moment that my mom life changed. It took a completely different trajectory.
Yeah.
So we put some boundaries in place. We put some filters on. We, started helping him. We talked with him, that sort of thing. And we did, all the things that parents do. But a year and a half later, we found out he was still involved with pornography. But at that point, he decided he wanted to get out of it. So that made a big difference. But in the meantime, I was having trouble. I was struggling because, I'm a pastor's wife. And because of the stigma of it and the fact that we were trying to plant this church, we just didn't feel like we could tell anybody. And truthfully, that doesn't really matter. No mom, wants to tell their friends or their family anything like that. So, it's not as if I could turn to my best friend over coffee and say, hey, my son watches porn. How about yours? Just not conversations we have, unfortunately. But, we're not immune from these problems. And so through the years, as we helped him, I was struggling to find help for myself. I was Googling support groups or just trying to find, as a parent, what am I dealing with and how do I walk through this? I did have one friend, thankfully, who was kind of a lifeline for me. She lived out of state and I could call her and she could talk me off the ledge, so to speak, remind me that I wasn't crazy and that I was making right choices. But I say all that because at some point, um, I read while I was doing research, I read that 92% of boys and 63% of girls are exposed to pornography before age 18. And
Wow.
that statistic is actually really old. So when I read that, I thought, my gosh, that is a lot of kiddos. And
Yeah.
so why aren't we talking about this? And if all those kids are being exposed to pornography, that means all those parents have children that are watching porn. And so those poor parents out there are all struggling like I was, just to try and figure it all out and figure out how to help their kids at the same time help themselves. And so
Hmm.
I decided that I wanted to help parents. And I have a little bit of a background of helping ladies within the church anyway, so it's not a foreign concept to me to counsel a little bit, do some discipling, that sort of thing. So I decided to start hopefulmom.net, at first in a pen name, but then last summer my son gave me permission to write in my given name. So that's how I started hopefulmom.net.
So those statistics are staggering. I mean,
Uh,
it's just unbelievable,
yeah.
and it is because we don't really talk about that. So, I mean, who is um, pornography affecting?
Um, Pornography is affecting everyone. There's
Mm,
no doubt about it that it's a spiritual issue for sure, but it's also a public health issue.
mm,
So we live in a society that says porn, either you're on one of two sides. You either think pornography is okay and what's the big deal? A lot of society believes that, or we just don't understand the pervasiveness of it, which was where I was at. I had no idea how easily accessible it was. I mean, it's free, it's in their pockets basically. And I just thought that since my kids grew up in a Christian household, we homeschooled. I
mm.
thought, well, they know Christian principles. They live in a Christian home. They're saved. We've talked about the dangers of what goes on the internet once. And so they're good to go. I just had no idea. So pornography is actually affecting all of us.
And it's interesting that you say, sometimes we think that we're kind of, we've insulated our kids.
Yes.
They're homeschooled, they've been in the church, all these different things, and we've got this relationship where we understand them, they understand us. Did your relationship with your son, was it affected by this whole issue? And if so, how was it
Sure.
affected?
Yeah, it was definitely affected. I mean, on the one hand, I was so grateful that he felt comfortable coming to us, especially the second time. But on the other hand, I had a hard time interacting with him. I grew up in an era, and you probably did too, where we were told that people who watch pornography are like slimy.
Mhm.
They're the ones that go in the back end of the video store. And so I had this hard time marrying these thoughts of who my son really was, because on the one hand I was thinking, is he a monster? And
Mhm.
then I had the guilt going on of like, oh, you're not supposed to think of your children like that.
Mhm.
And on the other hand, I knew him as this loving, funny, very personable, smart boy, and I just could not figure out how to mesh these two thoughts together. So I took it to God, and I was just praying about it, and dealing with grief and anger and all that. As I was working through some of that, I decided that he wasn't the monster that I thought he was.
Yeah.
Instead, he's a victim. He's a
Mhm.
victim of society that says this is okay. He was a victim even of, because he had asked an older trusted teen actually to see a photograph. That was his first exposure to it when he was probably 9 or 10. And that teen, in my opinion, should have said no.
Yeah.
So, he was a victim of possible, on the edge sort of sexual abuse. And so finally, when I thought to myself, okay, he's not this two-dimensional child. He's
Mhm.
not just all good. He's not just all bad. He's not a monster. Instead, he's really a victim. But in Christ's eyes, he's a potential victor. And
Mm-hmm.
so my husband really helped me to understand that, he's got Christ in his heart, and he wants to, especially after he wanted to change and break free of this addiction that he had. I started to see him as a potential victor, and that made a huge difference in our relationship, because
Mm-hmm.
once I could see him like that, then I could come alongside him easier and really help him through the trouble that he was having.
Yeah, yeah, I love that him as a victor. I know you have four kids. Where did he fall in the line of your kids? Was he the youngest, the oldest, and how did that impact the others, if it did?
Sure. He's our third in four. So we have three boys and then a girl. So um, by this point, by the time we found out about it, our older ones were out of the house. They were, in college and doing their thing. So, but it brought up a lot of stuff. I had to go back to the older boys and find out what was going on, and if and how they played a part in all of this. And at first, I was really concerned about our daughter, who was younger than him. I don't know how you are, but as a mom, I'm always trying to protect, and I'm always worried about what's going on. And so we really tried to protect her. And truthfully, the first time we found out that scene on the lawn, we didn't understand how bad it was, because he lied to us, and so we kept it from our daughter. We didn't want it to taint her view of him, and so we decided not to say anything. But the second time when he came clean, I really felt like God was saying, you need to bring this into the light. And
Mm-hmm.
so we decided to disclose it to his sister, and with his permission, we had told him, look, it's time for us to bring this into the light. And part of that is being able to tell people what's going on in your life, and so we can continue to protect all of you, but everybody knows and understands within our household what's going on.
Yeah, and there's definitely something about just exposing, sin,
Yes.
to kind of break that hole. I know there are probably parents who are listening who have tweens and teens,
Hmm.
um, and haven't really talked with their children about the effects of pornography, or they may even be new parents. What do you say to those parents?
I say to those parents, let's break down those walls and those barriers. Let's get rid of the stigma that we can't talk to it,
Mm,
and speak about it. So learn from my generation's mistakes. Talk about pornography and its effects early. And there are a
mhm,
couple of books that I recommend on my resource page on my website, but make it a part of everyday conversations. So as soon as they're able to understand things, start using proper body parts, start talking about private versus public parts of your body.
mhm.
And as soon as you shouldn't hand a device to a child unless they understand they might run across some of this stuff. I mean, I just talked to a mom the other day who had a 4-year-old, and she just set her phone down so they could watch a YouTube video. And as soon as that video stopped, another one came up that was not appropriate. And so thankfully her 4-year-old brought her the phone saying, hey, this
What
this
is
is happening. But when I say we need to talk about it, we need to normalize the conversation, which means being able to say the words pornography, porn, sexual activity, talking about body parts, using correct terminology, that sort of thing.
And, Barb, for some people who are listening and moms, I mean, they just have no idea of how, I mean, it's like, I just can't do that. I mean, I just
Right.
can't, you know what I'm saying? I mean, we
Yes.
these kind of taboo topics, and it's like, there's no way I can talk about sex or talk about these things with my kids, particularly, being somebody who's in the church and,
Right.
so I do that. And, I can see that being a barrier for people, but it is so important to realize that we have to be able to, as you said, to really be able to broach those topics, in an age appropriate way. But to not to shed light on those things,
Yes.
because that is so crucial. Um,
Yes.
there may be somebody who has discovered that their child has been exposed to pornography. Kind of walk them through that.
Sure. Well, first of all, I tell parents not to panic, but that might be too late at that point. And I had all the feels at the beginning of that, all of that too. So, don't be so hard on yourself. But the, most parents want a quick fix.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing I say is there is no quick fix. So settle in for the long haul. Be willing to understand that there's going to be ups and downs. There's going to be some setbacks, and so when you understand that up front, you're not so upset when they happen, because if there's a real problem, it didn't happen overnight, so it
Mm-hmm.
can't be fixed overnight.
Yeah.
So I tell parents to pause, pray, and process. So take that pause, take a minute, and if you're discovering it at the moment that you discover it, it's okay to say, "I'm not going to address this right now because I need some minutes to think about it and decide how we're going to deal with this."
Mm-hmm.
So take that time to pause and then pray about it. I mean, God's huge. God's a big God. He can handle all this. He can tell us what the next steps are.
Yeah.
And then process, because we don't know what we know and what we don't know. So sometimes kids are just curious. Well, all the time they're curious, but sometimes they've looked for it because they're curious. They've found their answer, and that's the end of that. But then sometimes, like my child, they are curious, they look, and then they're hooked. And so that it keeps going. And so, decide what you know and what you don't know, because what you don't know might be just as important, because you want to make sure you'll address that at some point. And then just tell your children, I am on your side. We are going to together combat this, because it's my job as your parent to protect you. And because I love you, I'm going to put some boundaries into place. And I always tell parents, we're not punishing our kids, we're protecting them. And there's a difference. And when we tell them that, they're going to be more open to what we do, right?
Yeah.
So put filters on, create the boundaries, open that line of communication. The most important portion of this is to make sure that our kids feel comfortable talking with us. So when we open that line of communication, and just to go back a little bit about, it being an awkward conversation, it sure is. And it sure is. And it took me a long time to say the words porn and pornography without stumbling over my tongue. So if that's an issue, look in the mirror and say the word 6 or 8 times, because let's just get comfortable. And really the only way we can get comfortable is by doing it over and over.
And that's so real. That is so real, because I'm sure there are people listening, trying to figure out, gosh, how does she become so wise at this? How does she become so comfortable at this? But how did your faith help you through this issue with you and with your son?
Oh, it was center. Our faith is just everything to us. So thankfully, we already knew Christ, he already knew Christ. And the Christian practices and rhythms that I put into place years ago really helped sustain me during my darkest times. So, there were many times where I was just going throughout my day, trying to check off my homeschool mom to-do list. And then all of a sudden I'd just be breaking down in tears. So I'd find myself at my bedside praying with my Bible open, journaling. But probably the most important practice that I had learned throughout all this was to forgive. So
who are you forgiving? Were you forgiving yourself? Were you forgiving him? What did that forgiveness process look like?
Sure. Well, I was angry at every person possible. I was angry at my
teenager that showed that picture.
Yeah. I was angry at my son, obviously, not just because he had watched pornography, but because he had lied to me and betrayed me.
Yeah.
That hurt almost worse than the pornography. So I needed to forgive him for that. I needed to forgive myself, or at least come into agreement with God that those sins had been paid already. That, because obviously there was something I had done incorrectly. Now and I needed to recognize that there was a portion that I needed to take blame for, so to speak, and I needed to seek forgiveness for that.
And what do you think that was? I mean, let's talk about that, because
Sure.
what were you taking ownership for?
I was taking ownership mostly for being ignorant, for not understanding what was out there. When I handed my son a device, because he didn't watch porn on his phone, he watched it on an iPod. So when I handed that to him, I had no idea. I had no idea that it connected to the internet and that he could access those things from. I had no idea that when we allowed computers in bedrooms, that was really a dumb idea. So I had to forgive myself for that. And then for me also, it was a matter of not having the conversations. So, and there's a fine line there, because, I can't walk around in the false guilt of not knowing what I didn't know. But at the same time, I was responsible for his care. And so I needed to seek God's forgiveness for, just not paying attention and not knowing what was going on. And then I was mad at his dad. So I needed to forgive his dad. And, that was trivial compared to all the other people I was mad at. But, part of me was like, this was your job. So, I walked through that forgiveness. And then, at the end of all that, I realized that who I'm really mad at is the porn industry for allowing this to happen. And society for not talking about it, for not being aware, for making it a taboo subject, and for not understanding that, we're pushing it under the rug, not getting how pervasiveness it is. So.
Yeah. So then how did you become then from that a certified sexual risk avoidance specialist? And what is that? That's a mouthful.
Yeah, what is that? I get that question a lot. So probably a couple of years ago, a director of an organization that's local here approached my husband and me about me being a facilitator. And what they do is they go into schools and we talk about risky behaviors. So there's 5 risky behaviors that we discuss, 2 of which are sexual activity and violence. So we talk to 6th graders through 9th graders about how to avoid these risky behaviors. And in the process of getting trained for that position, I went to a conference to become certified to teach these behaviors. So that's how I got that title. And we go into the schools, we talk to them, and I'm always sure to link sexual activity to pornography. And we talk about it openly in the classroom. We talk about the link to human trafficking and online grooming. So that's, it really is part of my wheelhouse. I love going in there and talking to the kiddos and see the when they make the connection, seeing their face, that aha moment of, oh, you mean when I'm watching porn over here, this is what it's doing to my brain, and this is how I'm contributing to human trafficking. I didn't realize that. So
Yeah. And isn't it amazing how God can take our experiences and, work those things out for good, to be able
yeah.
to help others and educate and all those wonderful things.
Yeah. He's an amazing God. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I wouldn't change those experiences for anything. And I've seen how my son has grown through it also. He's my hero.
Yeah. So has he had an opportunity to share with, I mean, how old is he now?
He's 20.
Okay. So how has that changed him, that whole process and just his spiritual walk?
Yeah, it's really drawn him closer to the Lord. He attends a Christian college, which may or may not mean a lot to some people, but he really has um, cultivated that relationship that he has with Christ. He talks with his friends a lot about various problems that they all have, including how they are attracted to pornography, because it's a big thing. It's a real deal. He has run Bible studies and groups at his college, so he's an up and coming leader.
He sounds like he is. And, and unfortunately, we live in just a society now where, so many things have become just the norm. I mean,
Yeah.
particularly as relates to sexual exploitation and,
Hmm.
all these different things that we've made okay, that we've condoned these things. I mean, you don't even have to get a device. You can just turn your television on. I mean,
Right.
just it's everywhere. And we've
Right.
okay. And
Hmm.
I think that the church universal really has to tackle this and deal with this if we're going to save our kids and help them not to go down this slippery slope of, um, of sexual sin.
Right. Yeah, that's why I talk, because I want to break down those walls, and I want the next mom to not be afraid to stand up and say, "My son's watching porn and I need help."
Yeah, yeah. So then, just give us some words of encouragement for parents.
Sure.
Whether they are, I mean, there may be parents that are thinking, "Oh, that little Johnny will never do that," and and those who are like, you know what, he's in that room with that door closed a lot, and I never really thought about what may be going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just some words of encouragement for parents,
Sure.
especially moms.
Absolutely. Yeah, so if you find out that your child is watching pornography, I'm saying you are not alone. There
Mhm,
are a lot of parents out there. And also, this does not define you, nor does it define your child, because that was a big issue that I had. I was like, oh my gosh, I have broken him for the rest of his life. Um, that's what I thought. So, but that's not true. Their
mhm,
story's not over yet, and our story is not over yet. And we need to keep that end goal in mind. So for me, the end goal is for my child actually to be an adult, a
mhm,
healthy, mature adult who contributes to society and who walks after the spirit.
mhm.
So yeah, their story's not over yet. So keep going. You might have setbacks, like I said earlier, but that that's not the end of the story.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is encouraging to know that it just may be one page, it may just be one chapter, but
Right.
it's not the entire book. You may be listening to this today and really want to get more information or support with this topic. You can contact Barb at hopefulmom619 at gmail.com. That's hopefulmom619 at gmail.com. Or you can visit her website at hopefulmom.net. You may even want to invite her to speak, if I can say that, maybe to come
Yeah.
speak at a group or a mom's group or a school group or whatever. I think it would be phenomenal because this is an area that we really need to address. Well, Bob, there are moms or parents or guardians listening to this, and some never even thought about this being an issue. And some may be struggling with how to what to do with their child who's been exposed. Can you just pray, take a moment and just pray for them before we close?
Sure, absolutely. Father, we thank you for who you are. We thank you for your son. We thank you for the opportunity to just walk after the Spirit every day. We thank you that your mercies are new every day. And Lord, I do lift up the parents of children who may be watching pornography. And if the parents don't know it, then I pray that you'll bring it into the light. And Father, I pray that you'll give parents wisdom and discernment and understanding and courage to be able to speak to their children about the dangers of internet. And Lord, I just want to thank you for Twanna and her ministry, and I pray that you'll continue to speak in her and through her to other parents. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
And Barb, it was so good seeing you again. And thank you for being a guest on Tea Time. And to all of our listeners, I want to remind you to like this podcast, and I look forward to connecting with you the next time. Be blessed of the Lord.